So the first thing I want to talk about is, after we had 4 losses and we had the bad loss to Charlotte, which we'll talk
Okay.
about the analysis of that game, this idea of intensity, urgency that is lacking from the players became a big thing that Pineda brought up as the issue. And, kind of claiming that the energy levels are high at practice. There's intensity, but it seems like on match day, particularly during that run of losses from Memphis, from the Open Cup through the Charlotte game, people weren't up for the games and weren't giving it their all. And I think there's certainly evidence of that. I mean, what you're seeing in terms of energy levels, maybe not being as high as you want. And you see that in a lot of games, even games you win. But the thing that struck me was that he said that was the number one problem
Yep.
to fix, and it's on him. So, Dave.
So one of the things I'll say right off the bat, so if that really was the problem, right, then how did we know that it was about to happen? Right? You can't, if it's intensity, if it really is intensity, the only person who could predict whether or not the intensity is going to be good is somebody who's in training all the time, right? You can see that. You see how the team's up and down or whatever. We're not there. So we can predict that. And yet we kept saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Even after our good start, we felt like there was a slide coming because it just wasn't on, right?
I had to delete my notes that a meltdown was coming from Araujo. Yeah. But it wasn't a meltdown, it was just an exit. So he's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah. We said that, if nothing changed, eventually he was going to melt down. It was going to be terrible. And that, to his credit, I guess he didn't, but he's gone. Yeah. So I guess it's sort of the same thing, same outcome.
So on this idea, though, of, intensity, if you've got good things happening in training, why are people playing flat when it comes to game day moments?
Well, the other thing I would say is that, often when you think about lack of intensity, you come out flat out of the locker room, and you have to recover for it. There's a lot of teams, who go down all the time or whatever. We actually are amongst the lead in the whole conference in scoring in the first 15 minutes, right? So that's in general. That's not in the game that we lost or whatever. But, if that's happening a fair amount, does that mean we're coming out lax?
Right. I'll get to the Colorado game and my observations on intensity and the players coming out with a little bit more of a skip. Sure. But
so I wanted to go. I mean, I think that I have a counter to this argument that it was intensity and urgency in particular. And let's just not talk about broadsides, but that was a response. Pineda said in response to the loss at Charlotte that it was a lack of initially intensity, and then he changed it to urgency, right? And I think I can prove that wasn't the case.
Okay, let's find out.
So Carmen, maybe you could pull up the first goal that we gave up. So if there was going to be a lack of intensity or a lack of urgency that really cost us the game, you would think that it would be what cost us the goal. And in particular, the first goal, you go down 1-0, it makes a huge impact on the game, right?
Yeah.
So we've pulled up the clip, right? We're in the 16th minute, right? So Charlotte is attacking down the left side, right? And Lennon's all the way back. So we're not in a situation where, we've been talking about all season where he's caught up the field, although we'll get to that in a minute, goal number 2. But in the first goal, he's back. He's trying to block a cross. So, and he fails to block the cross. So Carmen, if you'll play it and then hit pause in a minute. Okay, and pause. Okay, so he fails to block the cross, right? Gutman was all pinched in, but, that's for a cross or whatever. It goes over everybody's head, right? There's this moment of sort of reset. Mikey Dobbs, can you please describe for the non-YouTube listeners where Lennon is in relationship to the guy who just crossed it? He tried to block the cross, so you can probably guess.
Yeah, he's right next to him.
Okay, so now hit play and pause again a few seconds later. Okay. And stop. So they cut over to the other side. Stop.
Yeah.
So He was standing after he blocked the cross, right after he was trying to block the cross and didn't, right next to the guy, not Justin Merrick, I'm thinking the other guy, right next to the Charlotte player who's ultimately going to score. Okay. So he was literally touching him because he was trying to block the cross, right? The moment the cross goes over everybody's head, Gutman goes out to try to address it. What Lennon does is he takes off on a sprint to go stand next to Miles Robinson. Okay. So if you lacked intensity or urgency, you would just be standing around. Right. And if he had just been lazy, lacking intensity and urgency, he would be standing next to that guy. But he doesn't. As soon as the ball goes over, he goes sprinting and shows intensity and urgency to do what clearly he's been coached to do. Because if you were not coached to do that, if we went out, as we've done many times, and played in a 7v7 or a 11v11 men's league where there was no coach, and that ball went over the other side and you were the right back, where would you be in this moment?
Yeah, I'd be next to the open guy.
Next to the guy, because you would just be walking, right? If you would lack urgency and intensity, and you would not have an effort, you would just be there.
I wouldn't have left the guy anyway.
Well, maybe you wouldn't do that because of tactics, but most of us wouldn't have done that because we're just lazy.
I was about to say, as a lazy player, I would definitely still be
standing right by, but he doesn't. He goes sprinting right into the middle, right? And so what that tells me, it has to be coached. Right? There is no possible way that a player would just leave that guy and go running in. And is there an even open guy? Like, is he seeing a threat in this moment where you have pause? Yeah. Is there a guy for him to go cover?
Everybody's got you should be.
We have two in the middle. They have two in the middle, right? So Parata and Robinson are, have the two guys, right? We actually have 4v3 in the middle of the field, right? Is there any possible reason he might make the decision himself to go over there right now when you're looking at it?
Yeah,
it can't be.
Yeah.
There cannot be any reason. And yet he goes sprinting in. So now when they play it back out wide, watch it. He'll go even further. Play it and stop it again. Stop it. He goes all the way in there. Now you'll notice that another player pops up and he runs right by, I think it is Josetu. I'm not absolutely sure, at the top of the box. Paratas is sort of at 6s and 7s. He's covering nobody. But regardless, you might look at this now and say, which a lot of people did, and said, look, he covered the wrong guy on that. That was not the case. He ran in there and was standing there for a good 4 or 5 seconds before that guy ever made a run.
And it correct me if I'm wrong, but this confuses the other people on what their assignment is when he pinches in.
Right.
Right.
Because they actually can shift over because they're like, oh, I guess he's got him.
Right.
Right. But there was no reason for him to do that. If he lacked urgency and intensity, he would be standing right next to the guy. Now play the rest of the clip.
Yeah. Tap in
at the far post.
I mean, not only did he run in, he
didn't
even turn his hips to ever look at a guy that he knew he just left. And there's a guy who's about to cross the ball. So Dave, I would also say, like, obviously an individual mistake too, but so is there enough evidence in your mind that, because I think to play devil's advocate, somebody is going to say, well, this is just an individual mistake by Lennon. He wasn't being coached to do this, and maybe he did get a lashing when he came off the field. That that's not what's being trained.
I would say there. So all those people say individual mistake. I would say yes. Once he was in there, he never recognized the danger or whatever. Yeah. But how can you call that just an individual mistake when he purposely ran away from the guy with the ball into the middle? Like what? I mean, there's a lot of people, and maybe you're about to say it, we say, oh, you're not on the tactical training pitch. You don't know what the coach is saying, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I cannot think of any reason why, if it wasn't coached, why you just tried to block across, the ball goes up, you're standing right next to a guy, you would go running in when there's nobody standing there.
Right.
There was nobody. And a lot of people look at that clip and say he ended up with a guy. When he ran in the middle, there was nobody.
There's nobody who can't say he shouldn't have been on the guy that was the guy you mark as the right fullback, and he left him.
Yeah.
He left him actively. He ran. It was like almost a sprint that he ran into the middle.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he got caught watching the ball and the guy drifted
that's,
open.
And that's the observation, is that on the training pitch, or as a philosophy that is being hammered in, that get in
get in. Now you might say, we have no idea. It could be that he's been coached his whole life to do that, and it's not really Pineda telling him to do that, right? But I just don't buy it, because I see it from both, and we didn't see it last year from Gutman in particular, and he's now doing it a lot more. We don't know. We're not there hearing him coach it, whatever. But I just cannot see a justification, even if you were the kind of player who did that, why you sprint away from an open guy into the middle to cover no one.
Yeah. And even if he's done that, that's just like the player he is. At some point, Pineda has to say, stop. Because he's been doing it over and over and over. So I agree with you. Pineda.
So that changed the whole game. That moment, because that was their first goal.
Yeah.
Right. And Pineda gets up there and says, we lacked urgency, we lacked intensity. I actually think in that play, you could say we had too much urgency and too much intensity. He wanted to do something in the middle, maybe, right? And he left the guy wide open.
Yeah.
But he did it on purpose, and he did it with active intensity or whatever. We just proved that he wasn't being lazy and checked out or whatever.
So let's stay on this topic of we don't know, okay? Because we're not at the training, but we continue on this podcast talk about Pineda's tactics being wrong. So how do we know what his tactics are, Dave? So that's one example that we're inferring, right? That he's being told to pinch in there, and we've seen that with Gutman as well. So again, observations. This isn't one isolated incident on why we're thinking this is a directive being asked of his fullbacks to pinch in, which, as we just saw in that case, creates confusion on assignments when there's plenty of people in there to assign the right people. Don't leave the guy that's obviously needing marking as the right fullback.